just how, there's been an undermining of parental authority. There's been an undermining of even natural parent rights.
Yeah.
Who has the right to that kid? All of that stuff. Erin, you're a controversial figure. And I actually want to surface a little bit of controversy, a controversial comment you made in our last podcast. I want to surface that and help people see how controversial it was, and then have you respond. Because I'm an instigator, and I like to try and get you in trouble. No, we're really doing a part 2 of this podcast on preferred pronouns, I guess. And last time we talked about the whole idea of using preferred pronouns, and what do you do if your kid is asked to identify themselves using their preferred pronouns in school or those kind of things, and just all the implications of that. But in the last podcast, towards the end of that podcast, you were saying if the school is teaching this, then what we have to do is tell our kids and narrate for them that this is a false view of reality that you're getting at your school. It's incorrect. It's actually a lie, and it's not good for humanity. It's not good for us. And that's what we have to tell our kids. So basically what you seem to be suggesting is undermining the school system, undermining their teachers if they're at the local public school. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. Or
all right,
the other option is you allow them to undermine you and say nothing. So I think this wasn't instigated by us. So having that view, so if that's
you're not an instigator.
If that's controversial, I'm not saying I'm going to take my kids down to the public school and demand that the public school teach from Genesis 1:27. I'm saying they are the ones who. So this is because we were talking about in the last podcast, a second grader that was forced to stand up and tell the class their preferred pronouns. So this isn't being instigated by the parent of that second grader. The teacher is doing that. And so how do you respond? Well, you either allow them to undermine you and stay quiet with your own child. And I think sacrifice a lot in doing that, or you say something against what they said. And actually, hopefully, what we talked about in the first podcast was that hopefully you've already been having these conversations. And so when your kids are on the soccer field or in the classroom or at the doctor's office, wherever, that they're prepared at least a little bit in knowing that these are the conversations our culture's having. Yeah.
Okay. I think, that's great. That's great to identify that we're not the instigator in this. Yeah. And I want to draw out a kind of a parallel example that might help people see this. And it actually might expose some of our views on this. So if your child's math teacher or their second grade teacher or third grade teacher who was teaching them math, your kid came home and said, hey, my teacher taught me that 2 + 2 = 5. And my teacher taught me that 5 × 5 = 29. And on and on and on, and gave all of these examples of the teacher teaching false things about mathematics. What would you do? Would you simply tolerate that? Would you dismiss it as, well, that's their personal view, we don't hold that view, but we're not going to say anything, kind of thing? Or do you march down to that school and go, hey, what's going on? Let me get clarity what's going on. And ultimately, if that teacher kept teaching false answers to mathematical equations, would you not demand that your kid get out of that class and be, with another teacher? Yeah, that's how we would approach that. Well, let me suggest this is the parallel situation. We are talking about descriptions of reality, just like mathematics is the description of mathematical realities. When someone says that males can be females and females can be males. They're offering a vision of reality. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what your personal preferences are. It's not like, oh, now that we've moved into gender, we're in this realm where your personal preferences dictate reality. Yeah. And that's where so many people in our culture, that's their view.
Yeah.
But this is the same kind of thing. It's a knowledge claim. The claims in mathematics, the claims in, the geography class, the claims in, other disciplines are knowledge claims. And when someone is offering a take on human nature, which is what this is, the whole gender discussion and transgenderism is a take on human nature, the reality of human nature, in the fact that there is no human nature. There is no set human nature. Mm-hmm. They're offering a take on reality.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to be, if you would remove your kid in the situation where they were being taught false math, bad math, then why wouldn't you consider that in this other situation? Mm. That's the seriousness of it. That's where we're at. And I think it brings up this larger issue for us as parents, that this maybe finally this gender issue will force us to kind of rethink the issue of education.
And maybe force us to see that I think a lot of us, myself included, when we started parenting and thinking about education, I thought of the public school as a neutral zone as far as worldview. And I didn't
unpack that, because I think it might help people to maybe get a better idea of what do you mean by neutral?
Yeah, so I thought, by the time we put our oldest daughter in school, she's 5. And so the way I thought about the public school that we put her in, and I think even though now looking back on my experience of going, all I did was public school growing up, is that I had this idea that public school was neutral, like church, Christian places, those places aren't neutral. They're pushing a Christian message.
They're maybe biased. Right. This would be part of it.
And then, so we can think of all kinds of examples where, oh yeah, they have this bias and this group has this bias and this group has this bias. But when it comes to public education, I saw it. I mean, it's just the honest truth. I saw it as neutral, as not a biased place that was pushing a worldview in any way.
It's just all about teaching the facts of life.
Right. Even though my own experience, and now looking back on it, I can see how my history textbooks had a bias. My science textbooks, my science teacher who said, this idea of a creator is a fairy tale. We know from science that we don't need a creator, and making claims like that. And yet I go through that and I still have this idea. So, I think it was just kind of what has been pushed, that, hey, the public school is a religiously neutral place. And so therefore it's not making any claims about reality other than what's reality, that no matter what religion you are, you can affirm.
Yeah. So this is where I think it's so helpful to think in terms of worldview.
Yeah.
Because we might often think in terms of religion. Well, there's the Christian religion, there's the Hindu religion, there's the Muslim religion, and then we just, I think that the maybe the default view is, those are the people. They're biased. They bring in their religious bias, which, of course, if you think about bias, yes, everyone has a bias. Bias isn't necessarily bad in and of itself. Bias can prevent you from seeing the truth, but sometimes bias actually causes you to seek the truth more honestly, depending on the situation. And but let's set that issue aside. We often think of, well, the religious folks are the ones that come in with their bias. The non-religious folks are the unbiased ones.
Right.
And that's where I want to say, no, actually everyone, whether you're religious or irreligious, has a worldview. A worldview is just your picture of reality. Guess what? Everyone has a picture of reality. Most people haven't thought about it carefully, so they couldn't actually even articulate what their own picture of reality is. But if you ask the right kinds of questions and you really, spend time with that person, guess what? A worldview is going to emerge. They're not unbiased. That local public school teacher is not unbiased. The administrators aren't unbiased. The Christian school teachers aren't unbiased. And so let's recognize that everyone is coming in with a worldview. And the worldview it's the picture of reality that they take to be true. And so guess what? That's what they're going to teach. Mm-hmm. And so that's why you have teachers teaching that males can be females and females can be males.
So before we go there, just an additional thought on what we were talking about, worldview. Like you're saying, we all have a bias, right? Like you and I did this podcast and we say up front, we're bringing a Christian worldview to these issues of parenting. So we're telling you what our worldview is and where it's coming from. I think that's where, as I look back at why didn't I see the bias, I think because oftentimes the bias isn't admitted, especially in like a secular environment. They don't come out and say, my science teacher didn't start class by saying, hey, listen, I'm an evolutionist. I'm a materialist. I'm a naturalist. I don't actually believe in any possibility of the supernatural. So that's how I'm going to be teaching this class. So you might have a different worldview. Some of you kids might have grown up in a religious home where you have been taught that God's the creator. So that's a different worldview. Mine's different. There was no presenting like, hey, we all have a worldview. Let's talk about that and then talk about what our views are, what authorities our views are grounded in. It's just presented as like, this is the truth. I don't have any bias.
Well, that's a key phrase. This is the truth. Because we need to ask the question, what does it mean to have a bias? Well, that you're somehow disposed towards a particular view, or you lean towards a certain view, or you would want to promote a certain view. And well, why would that be? Because you take it to be true. You take it to be true. And now I think probably we dismiss quote unquote religious bias more quickly
right.
because of some of the sacred secular splits, like, oh, that belongs in the sacred realm. That's religion. That's subjective. That's a personal thing. So you keep that out. Those of us who are secular, we're not religious, and so therefore we're not tainted by that. Mm-hmm. But that's why I think worldview cuts through that nonsense and helps us to see everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a view of reality that they take to be true. And so they're coming to the table with that. And so the issue of preferred pronouns, the transgender issue these are worldview issues. Mm-hmm. There's a worldview out there that has a particular take on human nature, and it's sharing it with us. It is eagerly proselytizing. It's trying to persuade. But if it's the incorrect view of human nature, there's going to be all kinds of consequences. So this is significant. Yeah. And now the issue for parents. Mm-hmm. Okay, we are sending our kids to these institutions, whether it's a public school or whether it's a Christian school. And the question we need to regularly ask, and we need to do research on, and we need to figure out, we at least need to know what the circumstances are, but who is it that is teaching our kids? Do we trust them? Do they have a worldview that reflects reality? Or are they teaching our kids false things like males can be females? And if we're in that kind of situation, then what do we do? These people are either self-deceived, they're deceived, or they're lying about the nature of reality, and they're trying to pass that on to our kids and pass it off as knowledge. So what do we do in that situation? Because we have a biblical imperative here. We've cited Deuteronomy chapter 6 before. And, it's the famous passage in the Old Testament that talks about, Hear, O Israel, in verse 4, Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. Like, this is part of all of life. Teach them diligently. Who's the responsibility fall on? It falls on primarily mom and dad, parents. We're the ones that are responsible for the education of our kids. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sit down with them every day and teach them mathematics. And it doesn't mean that education can't be done in a public school or a Christian school. We're not saying that, but you are the primary person.
You're the overseer.
Yeah, you are the primary person who's responsible for it. You oversee this process. Mm-hmm. So you got to take ownership of this, and you got to take you and I got to take responsibility. And I'm sorry, I'm not just lecturing you. I'm saying that to us too. But this is where Christian parents have got to rethink the nature of education. Because if I have my kid in math class, and they're being taught 2 + 2 = 5, I'm ripping them out of that class. Well, here we have, I think, a parallel situation, but we're going to continue to allow those folks to educate the kid. I know this is a tough, difficult situation for parents. Mm-hmm. This is not easy, and I know it might even be making some people squirm right now as we talk about it. But at the very least, we have to rethink education, because it gets more insidious than just, they're giving wrong answers to certain questions. They're doing other things. And Abigail Schreier, we've mentioned her book before. She's someone that, if you're on social media, she's a good person to follow. If you're on Twitter, she tweets a lot about this particular issue. She wrote the book Irreversible Damage on the transgender movement, particularly how it's affecting our young girls. She recently wrote a little piece. I think it's in her Substack newsletter. In fact, let's put maybe we can put a link in the notes. We'll have Micah do that. Put a link in the notes to this article. It's entitled, or you can search, Google it for yourself.
But if they're on a walk or driving right now, listening to this podcast,
yes, then
it's helpful to put it in the notes.
Exactly.
So later they can find it. Okay, so we will do that. So you can look up this article for yourself and read it. And we highly recommend it. And more so, we highly recommend her book, Irreversible Damage, because it is just chock full with these stories and research that she's done. But
yeah, and we're going to reference some of these things, give you some of the specifics to kind of, I guess, keep opening all of our eyes to the nature of this threat. It's a serious threat to our kids. But I think there are some parents out there who maybe aren't aware of that yet. And so we want to open eyes to this. So here's the article. It's entitled, Should Public Schools Be Allowed to Deceive Parents? And so she references, the subtitle is No, and we need legislation to stop them. Mm-hmm. But if you just did that first kind of title, and then the name Abigail Schreier, I'm sure it would pop up probably in a search. But what she talks about is the conversation she had with a mother of a 12-year-old. And this girl is in middle school, and the mother ends up discovering that the school had changed the girl's name and her gender identity at school without the parents' knowledge of this. In fact, she talks about, or Abigail Schreier talks about the plan they had. It's a GSP, a gender support plan. And in fact, I am holding in my hand the gender support plan that I think the school offered, that Abigail Schreier, I think, linked to. But it lays out the plan, says legal name, student's preferred name, assigned sex at birth, gender, pronouns. We got the pronouns they, them. Then there's the question, are guardians or any family aware of this? And there's a yes. Okay, are they supportive? No. Why not? And they fill in the answer, not ready to tell family. Is there a plan to come out to them? No solid plan at this time. How can we support? Calling the name of, they cross out the name, but calling them they, them, using those pronouns. Are friends, peers aware? Yes. Are they supportive? Yes. So friends and peers are aware, but parents aren't. And then plan to inform teachers, staff. I mean, there's a whole plan here that lays this out. Everybody knows, but the parents. Everyone at the school knows, but the parents. And they are intentionally withholding this information. The mom only gets this information because she notices that her daughter's not doing well. Her mental health, her emotional health, she's not doing well. So she starts investigating, goes in and talks to teachers. They don't give her the information until one finally relents and lets her in on it. And then she becomes aware. There's a whole gender support plan in place at the public school. Everyone else is aware, but the parent.
Yeah, it even has a note that the substitute teacher would become aware.
Yeah.
In the case of a substitute teacher. And you just think about, I mean, we're so used to I'm so used to hearing these stories that it's always like, oh, yeah. But it's like, no, stop for a second. You're talking about a 12-year-old little girl who all of these essentially strangers, I mean, in middle school, you have a teacher for maybe a year. A substitute teacher would know before the mother of the daughter who has been raising this little girl. No one's more invested in a child than a parent.
That's questioned.
It's so.
That's not even assumed. That the parent has more invested. It's like, well, apparently these administrators, these teachers think they know best.
Well, right. Well, I know they think that, but that's where it's like, that's where you read this stuff and you'll almost gloss over it because it's like that mindset has become like, oh, the teachers, the administrators, they're the authority and the parent isn't. They're the experts, the parents aren't. So that's how they justify, like, hey, we're the smart ones here. Yeah. So we'll handle your kid and then we'll let you know when you can know what's going on. And so, but I'm just saying from a Christian worldview, just to step back and think, this is what we're saying. It's a 12-year-old whose own mother it's purposely being hidden what they're doing with her daughter 6, 7, 8 hours a day.
And what I think we need to help parents understand is that, number one, first recognizing that this is even the case, that oftentimes, I mean, it used to be that teachers and parents felt a lot more like allies. Right? That there was a view that they were allies and there was a proper view in the larger culture that parents were the proper authority. Right? And that just seems to be turned on its head. And thinking through why that is would be interesting. But I think that certainly correlates with the secularism of our culture. Yeah. And thinking about just how there's been an undermining of parental authority. There's been an undermining of even natural parent rights. Yeah. Who has the right to that kid? Mm-hmm. All of that stuff, which that's another podcast. Yeah. But I think we just as parents need to think about why, how we've gotten to this kind of place where this is a situation we find ourselves in.
Thinking about how we view teachers and at the school, and how we view ourselves, and where do we put ourselves now? I think that is important to think about. And so in the book Irreversible Damage, and I said in the last podcast, but it's written by Abigail Shrier. She is not a Christian, so she isn't coming from a Christian worldview, and affirms lots of things that from a Christian worldview we wouldn't affirm. But the research she does in this book, and on the chapter that she has a complete chapter called The Schools and what's going on in the schools. But if you think this story of this 12-year-old is just an isolated case, you read the book and you see, oh no, this is actually rampant now happening. And that it's actually the position of the National Education Association, the NEA, in America, their position is that parents will not be informed when children come out, quote unquote. And so this isn't just this is happening and you're in my crazy state, California. A lot of times they'll be like, oh yeah, that's happening in California. And it's actually happening all over the place. But she interviews several people for the book. But in one quote that I thought was chilling, she's talking to a 5th grade public school teacher who says, even when parents come in and say, I don't want my kid to be called that, talking about a changing of a pronoun or a name, they're trying to change their name. And so they say, I don't want my kid to be called that. This is what the teacher says. That's nice, but their parental right ended when those children were enrolled in public school. That's a chilling comment statement to read.
Yeah.
Now, I know this isn't the position of all public school teachers because I have a lot in my family, so I know, but that this would be the mindset of a teacher in a school is chilling, and I think speaks to more about us needing to know what is the worldview of the place and the people that we put our kids under their authority and influence. And are our kids prepared for that? Is our little 6-year-old prepared to navigate in a kindergarten class, a curriculum that's the most popular elementary school curriculum that's been approved by the California Board of Education? There's a lesson, it's called The Kid's Guide to Gender Identity. And the question is posed, who are you? You are who you are because you know best. And then that's
the answer that's given.
That's the answer. You are who you are because you know what's best. This is to elementary school kids. And then it said, a quote later is, babies can talk. So babies can't talk. So grown-ups make a guess by looking at their bodies, talking about their gender identity. So babies can't talk when they come out. So adults are just making guesses. Now, I want to say that this is not, and she makes the point in this book that what's happening in so many schools is not necessarily all this new sex ed curriculum that parents just don't realize is getting put in. That's happening too. But even if these elementary school parents would say, hey, what's the sex ed? The school could say, oh, none, we don't have any. Because this curriculum, the Kid's Guide to Gender Identity, is not considered sex ed. It's just a part of the school's curriculum. And so there's no
it's under some other category.
And there's no opting out of it. And actually in the book, she says that a lot of this is being pushed as under the guise of anti-bullying. Mm-hmm. And so she said she thought the anti-bullying was about physical abuse of kids with each other, and then when you actually look at the anti-bullying curriculum, it's all about gender identity.
Yeah. We'll go back to that statement. You know, this is what's being taught. You are who you are because you know best. You determine who you are. You determine your own identity. Well, that fits then. That's an expression of a worldview that fits with a gender support plan.
Yeah.
So that then fits with, if you know who you are better than anyone else, then you can see why you don't need the parents in there, because you determine it. And your parents actually could be a real big obstacle to that. And so let's protect you from your parents. In fact, kind of what you said there, Erin, just fits with what Abigail Schreier says in that article. Let me read 2 paragraphs that capture the gravity of this situation. She says this after going through this story about the mom and finding out about the gender support plan and all that stuff. She's talking about the issue of what's being taught to our kids. But she says a peculiar power imbalance has arisen between public school teachers and the parents for whom the necessity of work renders them too dependent on these schools to question them. That statement alone we should stop and reflect on. Are we too dependent on schools to essentially watch our kids for us so that both parents can work? And now we're in a situation that there's this power imbalance that we won't even question them.
So we're kind of held hostage
yes.
to what they're doing because we're in these situations where there's nothing else. We can't afford to pull them out. We can't stay home. And so we're kind of held hostage.
Yeah. So I know that might hit some parents out there, right between the eyes, and it might feel like, well, no, yeah, I'm in that situation. I'm stuck. There's nothing else we can do. And I think that's where we got to ask that question. We have to be able to ask the question to one another as followers of Jesus. Are you really stuck in that situation? Maybe you are. Maybe you're on you're on the poverty line and you're just making enough with both parents working to feed your family and house and clothe them. Okay. That's a difficult situation. Obviously, those circumstances are going to inform what you can do. But for others, is it really out of necessity, or is it out of comfort? And we've come to be socialized into a particular view of life and what makes up the good life. And are we too attached to our comforts? That we've then abdicated the education of our kids, and we are going to one day regret that. We got to at least ask that question, because you and I have met too many parents who are on the other side of this. Their kids are now 25, 30, and have completely taken a secular worldview on and have walked away from the faith. And I know those parents would say, I'd give anything to go back and redo some of this. Mm-hmm. So are we sacrificing that for current pleasures? Maybe not, but that's the question that we have to wrestle with. So,
because it's certainly our biggest responsibility as parents to oversee the training, nurturing, and care of our children.
Yeah, teach them diligently. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let me go back to that paragraph. A peculiar power imbalance has arisen between public school teachers and the parents for whom the necessity of work renders them too dependent on these schools to question them. Parents discover radical materials pushed on their children by accident, meaning they discover it by accident, not that it's pushed on the kids by accident. Yeah. Like passers-by happening on a crime scene. Then they, the parents, are treated as interlopers, trespassers. They are made to understand that they have no right to be there, which is what you just quoted. Mm-hmm. Information on the ideology pushed on their kids is revealed on a strictly need-to-know basis. When parents do object to classroom gender ideology, they're treated as morally obtuse or child abusers. The contempt shown parents would be inexcusable even if teachers stuck to reading, writing, and arithmetic. In a time when so many public school teachers are properly described as activists, That arrangement strips children of their family's protection. And families must indeed protect them from an ideology that would turn students against any adult who suggests that a 7th grader suddenly jonesing for hormones and surgeries slow down. I have more than once wondered whether public schools that would openly pit students against their families, turn them against themselves and each other, aren't doing more harm than good. This is someone who would describe themselves as politically on the left, as a liberal, not a believer, saying this. So this isn't just something that Christians are saying. More and more people are saying, wait a second, what's going on? And this is where we as Christians need to think, as the primary disciplers, teachers of our kids, are we just giving them over to people that we don't trust, who don't share our worldview, and who are actually teaching them false things?
Yeah. And that job of overseer, I mean, we're not just actually beating up on public school. And in the book, Schreier gives examples of these elite private schools that these parents are paying lots of money for their kids. And she mentions this one in Manhattan where within a year's span, she had no idea that in her daughter's class, 4 different transgender speakers had been brought in that school year. Yeah. And so this kind of stuff can be, again, it's not always in this, well, you used to be able to opt out of the sex ed if you didn't like what they were teaching. We're so beyond that. This is through speakers at assemblies and speakers in the classroom and picture books that they're reading and all kinds of stuff that unless the parent's there constantly, it's going to happen without their permission and without their knowledge. And so being an overseer of your child is becoming more and more difficult in a what doesn't that make sense though? In a culture that's becoming more and more post-Christian and more hostile to the ideas that we find in Scripture. Yeah,
and Schreier talks about, in this article, she talks about how we need some new laws that grants parents the right to have all of the children's education records and curriculum available to them, because she talks about how that's not even the case now. There are different ways that schools can hide what they're teaching and what they're doing from parents. In fact, I just talked recently to a council member here in a city in Orange County who talked about trying to get a hold of just the sex education curriculum for some of the school districts in Orange County, and how it was impossible, and how she had talked to parents who had even gotten samples of some of the sex ed curriculum, but of course it didn't include the most controversial stuff. So parents are not only we find the situation where now there are activist teachers, and of course we just want to clarify, we don't think that this is every public school teacher,
of course,
but there are plenty of examples out there. And in fact, if you're not you're one of those, maybe you're a Christian and you're in the public schools teaching, you see this, you see what's going on. And it's going to require, you are in a strategic position. We're not advocating here like, hey, let's time to withdraw. We're saying, hey, we got to think through this and we got to come up with some strategies. And it might be time for Christian educators who are in these public institutions to start figuring out some plans. Like maybe you've got to band together and start to fight against this stuff and to see if some of this is salvageable. And Schreier, you got to read this article because she talks about whether or not the institution is salvageable.
Yeah.
But
certainly, just thinking about that as a Christian in the schools and how it is becoming, and we know this because we know teachers, it's becoming more difficult even for the teachers and administrators.
Yeah.
But to participate in a clear deception against a child's parent, it just seems so obviously morally wrong. That's something that a Christian couldn't participate in.
Faithfully following Christ in that situation means you go against that. And even if it costs you your job,
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. And this is why, we've recommended reading Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies. And we may, it seems like we're in a situation culturally where Christians are going to have to start sacrificing comfort and even jobs. And many have. And we have plenty of examples of this. But those are the things that we have to count those costs as we try to follow Jesus in this culture. So, all that to say is, we know there are good people in public schools and in private schools, and they're going to have to figure out in those places where God has put them how to be faithful. But
good.
So setting that aside, we're not dismissing that in that institution, those institutions, and those good individuals there. But we are in a situation if we're gonna give an honest assessment, we're in a situation where kids are being taught things that are false about the nature of reality. And it goes beyond that. It's much more insidious than that. Parents are being actively deceived. Parents are often viewed as the enemy. And that, hey, when the kid walks onto the campus, your rights kind of stop. And so we actually can help your kid transition from male to female or female to male without your knowledge of it. That's the kind of situation we're in. So it completely undermines parenting. It undermines our discipleship and our education of kids. It undermines the Christian worldview. We've got to rethink this if that's the situation we're in.
Yeah, and there seems to be a shift even and this is why, and I think some of our next podcasts are going to be on this idea of education, or the topic of education, but even the idea of what education is for. As Christians, we have to be really clear on that too, because then that's going to help us evaluate where we put our kids to be educated. Yeah. But in the book, she quotes from a lady who is in the Los Angeles Unified School District, so here in California, which is the second largest school district in the United States. And she oversees the policy for the whole district on sexual orientation and gender identity. But this is what she says about education. And she says, the role of schools has changed. Technically, we're an educational institution, right? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. Technically, that's what we are. But schools have expanded to be the hub for a lot more social services and looking more holistically, emotionally at what's going on with children. Looking at schools as a source of social justice. Our role continues to expand. The outreach now is profound. So she's giving a view of education and then what the state's role is in that for kids. So that ought to make any Christian whose kid is in public school, especially the LA Unified School District, but in any public school, I mean, this was a candid conversation, but is that the view that the state has of school? That because you might be a Christian parent thinking, hey, I'm putting them in there, teach them how to read, write, do math, keep it simple, please. And they're saying, no, actually, sorry, it's much bigger than that. Feel free to drop them off, but we have a much bigger agenda.
Well, she says it right there. Our role continues to
expand. Yeah.
It's a worldview.
Yeah.
There's an entire worldview that they want to offer our kids.
And I think, and that my point is that is a change from what the culture used to, especially American culture. I mean, school used to be reading, writing, and arithmetic. That's what it was about. But we have to be aware. We are in 2021, and if this is what the public schools are saying is the role of education and their role in our children's lives, then before we sign them up in public school, we ought to at least be aware of what their objectives are.
Yeah. And all of this, as we talk about all this is not merely critiquing the culture. This is not merely about the culture war or battling the cultural battles. It really is about human flourishing. The worldview that's being offered offers an alternative view, a false view of human nature and what it means to be human and how we flourish as human beings. The biblical worldview, the Christian worldview, offers another view of human nature and what it means to flourish. And those are competing visions. And either they're both wrong or one's right and one's wrong, but the point is they can't both be right. They're contradictory views. And if the Christian worldview is true, then the secular view, the whole transgender movement is a false view, and it's not going to allow our kids and the next generation to flourish. We only flourish when we act in accordance with our nature, with our design. And so that's what this is about. It really is about loving people. This is why it's so vital to connect truth to our definition of love, because truth allows people to flourish. And if you love people and you want them to flourish, then they have to have the truth as well. And so for our own kids, who are our primary responsibilities, we've got to rethink education in light of all of this, especially when not only is our knowledge and our Christian worldview being undermined, but our parental authority is as well. So I know it's a heavy conversation. It's a lot to think about. I know, and a lot of parents we've been talking to have been wrestling with this and looking for alternatives. And this is where I think local churches are so vital. Yeah. If there's a pastor out there who's listening right now, this is where we as in the ministry need to be thinking about how do we come alongside parents. This might be where we say, guess what? We're going to open up our church building throughout the week and create some kind of co-op and help these parents, maybe parents who both parents are working and a single parent, or how can the church recapture education?
Yeah, I just actually heard a story of a church this year. They started towards the end last year, but where they've said, okay, use this building. And, a lot of people were looking for alternatives with school and the Zoom and the Mass and all that stuff. But how the church has said, okay, let's do this and let's be a resource to our family. And they've opened up and they're doing a 2 or 3 day co-op and helping the single parents in the community. And it was so cool to hear, but that's where there's a lot at stake here. Yeah. And we're doing this podcast not to be alarmist or to give these extreme stories to scare people. It's because there's so much at stake, and our kids are so vulnerable to the people that we put in their lives as authorities. And our kids can be easily deceived by what's told to them. And so we have to take our role as overseers and protectors of them seriously. And so, let's get serious about it. If we're doing it, then about helping the community around us. I know families that are, 2 families in particular I'm thinking of that are helping single moms this year to homeschool. They're helping to take the kids to co-op. They're helping, 1 day a week at their house, and then the moms are doing other things. It's just a beautiful picture of, hey, this is important. And these kids in our churches are our kids. And so let's work together to train them up in the way they should go and be a community about it. It's not read this stuff and then let's all go hide or feel bad about ourselves or beat ourselves up, but let's do something about it.
Yeah. And let's view our kids' education through a biblical lens, where we're reminded in Deuteronomy 6:7, you us, we are the ones who should teach them diligently. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.